I am pleased to introduce our next guests. Representative Vance Aloupis and Representative Rene Plasencia, coming to us via Zoom. You see them on the screens right now. Representative Vance Aloupis is the representative for House District 115, serving Miami-Dade County. First elected to the Florida House in 2018, Representative Aloupis currently serves as chair of the Early Learning and Elementary Education Subcommittee. Representative Aloupis' works every day in education, between serving on education committees in the legislature and writing education policy, to working as an executive for an education nonprofit while not in the legislature. Representative Aloupis has spearheaded policy changes surrounding early childhood education, and we look forward to working with him further as he moves towards the future changes in this area specialty. Representative Aloupis is married to Mariela, and they have 3 children. Representative Rene Plasencia is a representative for House District 50, serving Orange and Brevard counties. There you go, Orange and Brevard are in the House. First elected to the Florida House in 2014, Representative Plasencia currently serves as chair of the Higher Education Appropriations Subcommittee and serves on the Post-Secondary Education and Lifelong Learning Subcommittee. They like long committee names in the House. Representative Plasencia knows firsthand what it's like to be in the classroom as a teacher and a coach working for Orange County Public Schools. He has been a strong advocate for public schools in protecting the rights of individuals to collectively bargain in Florida and has sponsored legislation on behalf of FEA regarding salaries. He is married to Marucci and they have 2 children. Please welcome Representatives Aloupis and Plasencia. And Representatives, thank you both for joining us today. I want to start with a question and ask you if you could provide our members with some inside knowledge on why some bills seem to pass instantly and other bills take years to pass. So we'll start with you, Representative Plasencia.
Yes, that's a great question. And when I first got elected, it's one that I didn't know the answer to as well as I do now, having served 7 years in the legislature. Sometimes first of all, it's very difficult to get any bill passed. Typically, in an average year, of all the bills filed, about 10 to 15% of the bills actually get to the governor's desk and get signed. So it's more likely for a bill, even if it's good policy, not to make it through the process and not to be signed by the governor and become law than it is for the opposite. And I always tell people that's a good thing. We oftentimes file more than 3,000 bills. You don't want 3,000 changes every year to your state laws, and lots of times, and the vetting process is important because, if you go through a harsh vetting process, then you're more than likely to get it right, even though it doesn't always happen that way. But that in itself is one of the reasons why it's so difficult to get a bill passed. But other than that, it could be any of a number of reasons why a bill doesn't pass from one year to the next. I'll give you an example. Last year we passed seclusion and restraints, which is a K-12 bill for children that are for ESC students, prohibiting school districts from secluding students as a method of classroom management. And so that bill took 12 years to pass for a number of reasons. It could be who opposes the bill, who supports the bill. It could be leadership's position from whether the House or the Senate or the governor's office on the bill. There's a lot of different factors of why a bill doesn't get passed. But at the end of the day, we work hard to get each of these bills passed. And when they do, it's a great moment for those of us who've worked on it for the amount of years that it's been worked on.
Thank you, Representative Plasencia. Representative Aloupis, anything you want to add to that on why sometimes it seems to take a while to get some bills passed?
Andrew, I have a really important question. Which of us was late to the meeting? No, I don't know if the folks there know. Andrew and I have actually known each other now for, my gosh, Andrew, we're getting old, probably almost 8 or 9 years. It's just a reminder of how our paths cross in life. And Andrew and I met at a meeting for the organization that I now lead, talking about early childhood education. So it's been an absolute honor and privilege to work with him in his new role and my new role. I think what Representative Plasencia says is spot on. And I'll give you a perfect example. My background is in early childhood education. I've been in this space for the better part of 11 years. And last year, myself, along with Chair Grawl, passed HB 419, which was probably the most transformational piece of policy we've seen in early childhood since the passage of the School Readiness Act 20 years ago. And, for me, what I would say to folks on the floor is, you can't even begin to understand the importance of this legislation, and you can't begin to understand how far we've come to get to this point. And that issue was something that I was working on as an advocate 11 years ago, going to the legislature, trying to convince them of the importance of early childhood education, talking about accountability, talking about quality pre-K. And it was year after year of just educating members to understand the issue before you ever saw legislation even proposed. And it was Representative Grawl who was the first one to really bring the legislation, and her first step wasn't just bringing this massive package. It was the creation of a task force called the Early Grade Success Committee that allowed us to bring stakeholders together to talk about the issue. And then it took us 3 years to actually pass the bill. So like Rep. Plasencia said, there are so many external variables, right? Where are the stakeholders? What changes have been made over the course of the summer? What's the position of leadership? So most of the transformational issues you see, especially in education, take a considerable amount of time if you really understand the full context and history of the bills.
Thank you.
Hey,
so
can I add something?
Yeah, go ahead.
Add something real quick as well? And sometimes it also takes the right person getting elected. And so in case in point, you have Representative Aloupis, who was an advocate for so long and passionate about early childhood education, and was able to pass, that transformational policy with the same chief of staff that we had 2 years prior when we couldn't pass it then. And so, chief of staff has the trust of the speaker. So that is someone, especially when you have a seasoned and a thoughtful chief of staff, as we do right now, who has been around this process for quite some time. And so, when you have someone like Rep. Aloupis who comes in and has the ability to get things done, when those of us before him and others before him weren't able to do with the same, essentially, to a certain extent, the same thought leaders and leadership in power, that's attributed to the bill sponsor and to the right person getting elected. And you'll see that happen in other areas as well.
Thank you. And clearly, as Representative Aloupis and Representative Plasencia pointed out, even sometimes lawmakers have a hard time getting their bills moving and passed, and it takes some time. So as you know, FEA's legislative platform includes legislation that addresses what we believe will help with the teacher and staff shortages we're seeing around the state, and that is fair and equitable salaries for all our educators, not just raises for first-year classroom teachers, but for all educators, all of our teachers, as well as our support staff in our schools. Do you have any thoughts on this legislative priority of FEA? And can you give our members and leaders some advice on how best to really advocate to try to move that legislation this session? So Representative Aloupis, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so I'm really interested to hear Rene's position because, Rene spent so much time in the classroom. But I think the way that I look at it, my wife was a kindergarten teacher for a number of years. We sort of look at it from the vantage point of recruitment and retention, and what are the barriers that are being put in place for that recruitment piece? What are the barriers that are in place for retention? I think and you have to address every single component. There's no one silver bullet bill that's going to address the entire system. So, with the teacher compensation bill that we passed, obviously that was really focused on recruitment, bringing teachers into the profession. I think there also has to be a significant look at our schools of education, making sure that we are creating a pipeline for individuals to come into the profession. But then also understanding that once teachers are in the profession and knowing the statistics, knowing the data to show how quickly many teachers end up leaving the profession, I think a lot of that is because we need to provide teachers with autonomy to teach, but also understanding the financial component is very significant. And based upon the teacher compensation packages we've had in years past, some communities have more discretionary income to address veteran teachers than others.
And Representative Plasencia, I know you've sponsored the bill, and I believe are sponsoring the bill for us again this year, but you want to talk a little bit about the teacher salary and support staff salaries.
Sure. So I've sponsored that bill this will be year 4 that I've sponsored the bill. And actually, I sponsored the majority of that bill prior to my partnership with the FEA on the rest of that bill. So this is giving the school districts flexibility to be able to provide a better salary scale that's more conducive to rewarding veteran teachers as well as beginning teachers is something that was a focal point of mine at the onset of getting elected. It's one of the main reasons I ran for office. We are all familiar with the bill in 2011 that implemented a lot of these policy issues that have made it a little bit more difficult for teachers to get paid, not because of lack of dollars, but because of a lack of flexibility with the dollars that the school districts have. And I do want to point out, and Chair Aloupis said it as well, we appropriate the dollars. The school districts are the ones that decide teacher salaries and the increases through negotiations with the union. And I'm always arguing with my local school board that they have more money than they're saying they do. That's a different argument. But a couple of things I want to touch on is advocacy, because you did mention that. And, I think the first thing is advocate respectfully and with civility. And I'd like to say, first of all, that I'm the first person who made a very costly error in the beginning when I was first filing this bill. And some of the words that I chose to use to describe this bill when I was talking to the press. And I think, I meant no harm by it. I didn't think about it when I was saying it, but I understand it now. But I think some of the words that I used that were published kind of set us back in trying to get this passed. That being said, I go around with a folder that has the data on what merit pay has done to compressing our salaries, and then most recently how we designed the breakup of the $500 million that we use for teacher salary increases, base salary increases, which 20% of it can go to veteran teachers. But I carry around that folder, and I meet with every Speaker of the House, and I meet with every incoming Speaker of the House, and I tend to meet with every chairman or chairperson of education, so I can really have a deep dive and a conversation as to why it's important for us to pass this bill. I did it with Speaker Sprowls just 2 weeks ago, and we had a great conversation, and I shared with him. And when I say this to people, especially lawmakers, they get it. If I were still teaching right now, I'd be in year 23. With the salary that I was making in Orange County right now, what I would be making would only be $3,000 more than a beginning teacher. So that's shocking when you think of after 23 years of being a teacher, that I would only be making $3,000 more than a first-year teacher. And that's something that really takes people by surprise when they hear that and they say, yeah, we have a problem, we need to figure out how to fix it. And so I'm hopeful that this is the year that we can do it. But I think what's important, and the reason I wanted to share it with you is that I understand that I may not be the bill sponsor that gets it passed, but I have to set the groundwork for a future legislator or someone in the legislature right now, once I'm gone, to pass the baton to and set the framework and the base for them to get that bill passed. And so I'm working as hard as I can so that if I don't pass the bill, that I've set up a framework so that it's easier for someone else to pass the bill, whether it's next year or the year after. I don't need credit for it. I just want the right policy to be done. And the last thing I do want to talk about is to know the right talking points. Oftentimes we become very passionate about our advocacy, and we fail to touch on the right talking points that moves the needle with the person that you're trying to convince. So it's about knowing your audience and knowing which talking points to use. And I'm more than happy to have that conversation with anyone who's going to be advocating for this bill on how to talk with their legislator.
Thank you. So often when we talk about our public schools, the focus is primarily on teachers, yet nearly a third of school employees are not teachers. These often overlooked employees are essential to the operation of the schools and include our bus drivers, custodians, cafeteria workers, maintenance workers, paraprofessional, office staff, and others. Yet school districts are facing massive shortages in trying to fill these vital positions. Do you have any thoughts on how we ensure that our students have the staff in our schools needed to make sure they get to school and home safely, and that they get all the services they need while at the school? And I'll start with you, Representative Plasencia.
Thank you. So I'm a budget chairman. I chair higher education appropriations. And so I have spent the greater part of this last year diving into our higher education budget, both from the state side and from the individual state universities, state colleges, and for-profit and private independent colleges and universities. And I thought I knew a lot about the budget, which I did. And I knew the K-12 budget much greater than I did the higher education budget up until last year. But I say that because it is very complex, and it takes a lot of money to run our state. And in addition to that, it takes a lot of money to invest in new areas. And so, whenever there's an opportunity, if I'm going to vote on a bill, or if there's a policy that puts more money in teachers' pockets, I'm voting for that 100% of the time. Yes, I want to see paraprofessionals make more money, bus drivers, custodians, cafeteria workers, but I also want to see highway patrol officers make more money. I want to see corrections officers make more money. And we as the legislature, we don't dictate the salaries for our school employees. We send the money down, which then gets negotiated for all our school employees, but we do directly decide the salaries for all of our state employees, including our highway patrol and including our corrections. And I say that because when I got elected, we went 5 years without giving a pay raise to our corrections officers. Their salaries are pretty dismal, and we're always trying to kind of juggle our budget to see if we can, from year to year, have a pay increase for our state employees. Every year we've had an increase since I've been elected in our FESP and our BSA, our base student allocation, which is one of the pockets where our school districts have access to negotiate for teacher salaries and for all school employee salaries and benefits, because that becomes very costly as well. And so I'm saying all this because if we were to invest the same amount that we're investing in teachers in all of our school employees, then we might have to invest another $500 million, which adds up to $1 billion, in addition to what we're already having the BSA, which is anywhere from $175 million to $300 million, depending on which year it is. So you're looking at $1.2 billion, $1.3 billion. At that point, you're not going to be able to increase salaries for your corrections officers and your highway patrol and your state employees who are working just as hard as well. And so it's a matter of balancing who you can give significant pay raises to and dollars towards. And I wasn't a part of that conversation, but I guarantee you, in that room they were saying, are we going to have enough to give significant pay raises to everyone, or are we just going to have to choose teachers? And at some point, the focal point tends to be on teachers. And as a former teacher, I appreciate that, but it is very difficult to be able to provide the budget for all of it.
Thank you. Representative Aloupis, anything to add?
Yeah, I think Chair Plasencia makes an important point. So one of the issues that we're going to be talking about next week in my committee, and I hope all of you are as passionate about early childhood as I am, is we've had a massive shakeup in the early childhood system. I think people have really begun to understand that in some ways childcare is the backbone of the workforce, right? Parents cannot go to work if they don't have a place for their child to be during the day. And what we are seeing across the state is a sort of a lack of people willing to go back into the centers. And the impact that has is that you have center directors who are now teaching just to make sure that they're meeting ratios. You have centers that are getting class 1 violations because they're out of ratio, because they're trying to serve the children that they've been serving for years, but they don't have the teachers. And understand that I saw this today, the median salary for an early childhood teacher, and I use the teacher very, very deliberately because they're not just childcare workers, they're not babysitters, they are teachers. They're making $12 an hour. So when we address this, and to your question, Andrew, I think this is a challenge that every industry is facing, and that's what Rene was speaking about. So I think we're all trying to address this as comprehensively as possible. But in our early childhood space, what we are looking at is trying to figure out how do we lower those barriers to allow people to go into the profession in a way that meets the need that we have to serve families. Because I think what you're talking about, Andrew, is really clear. It's an ecosystem. You need the bus drivers, you need the paraprofessionals, you need the custodial services. All of these pieces need to work together to ensure that we can educate our children to the best of our ability. So again, it's a challenge that every industry is going through right now. And for me, just seeing it in the childcare industry as significant as it's been, and understand, sorry to sort of jump on my soapbox, but it's a very different system than a lot of other industries where you might see the cost of a product go up, and that justifies hiring more. In subsidized childcare, you've got a fixed rate, so you're having to do the same amount with less money. So again, an issue that we're facing across all industries, but something that, at least in my space in the early childhood arena, we're really trying to get on top of.
Thank you.
Hey, and Andrew, can I add something else as well?
Yeah.
So two things I want to add. I was having a conversation earlier today with Michael Alessandri, who's the director of the University of Miami CARD Center, which in CARD they deal with our school districts as they also deal with autism centers throughout the entire community. But we were talking about this exact same issue, and one of the issues he was talking about in trying to keep our support staff at our schools is that they're not full-time employees. They're seasonal employees because they're 10-month employees and they're hourly, so they don't get benefits. And if we were to provide benefits, then we probably wouldn't have as many vacancies in those positions as we currently have. But the cost of providing benefits, if every school district in the state were to make all those positions salaried and provide benefits for them, I don't think they could afford it. The state of Florida couldn't afford it. So it is cost prohibitive to a certain extent, and we're talking about very large budgets. When we talk about a $700 million investment from the state just on teacher salaries, that is a huge investment. We have very large school districts. We're a very large state, so it's not as simple as let's just put more money in it, or let's take money from one pot and take it to this pot. I guarantee you, every silo, whether it's healthcare appropriations or transportation or ag and natural resources, they're all asking for more money. And then the other thing I would add as well is when it's all said and done, and we're looking at 20, 30, or 40 years from now, all the decisions that were made by the legislature, I believe that the most important decisions that will have been made in education are the ones that are in the early childhood space. And investing in early childhood, in my opinion, and I think there's a lot of people that agree with me, is where we should be investing the dollars. If you take a look at the disparities in attainment, in educational attainment within our communities, you're also taking a look at which communities have a more robust pre-K system than others. And so kudos to the school districts. I'm sure others have it. I know Orange County better than others, better than most, because that's where I worked. But Orange County has invested in just over 100 VPK programs, which they have full-time teachers, certified teachers that are Orange County employees that they do pay salaries to, and they do have benefits that are Orange County run pre-K centers. And so if every pre-K center could be run by our school district, which would be very expensive, you would see our poverty level go down. You would see our number of first-time students going into college from a family go up. It would be a game changer for our communities.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, Representative Plasencia, because even here in this room, we have about 600 delegates here, and we have pre-K teachers who are certified pre-K teachers, as well as paraprofessionals who serve in that role as pre-K. So we're very well aware of the early childhood. And quite honestly, Representative Aloupis, we really appreciated your bill last year that really did bring some more accountability to some of these other pre-K programs that are out there. So Representative Plasencia, I want to start with you on this question because I want to talk about colleges and universities. And what I want to kind of say is that, we've seen certainly some proposals or some changes that have been done over the last few sessions that include addressing performance funding, intellectual freedom, presidential searches. So can you share any thought you may have and what you see coming down the pike as it relates to legislation addressing colleges and universities? And again, also talk a little bit about how our members who are in the higher education area can really advocate for changes they want to see.
Yeah. So what's interesting is in my committee, we deal with workforce and higher education appropriations, and so I also serve on the policy subcommittee that deals with those same areas as well. And what's interesting about that is workforce funding comes through my committee, which means that we do all the funding for our CTE programs. And so depending on what county you're in, CTE may fall within your K-12 school district, or it may fall within your state colleges, depending on the county you're in. But the emphasis, whether it's CTE, whether it's state colleges, and our state university system as well, the emphasis over the last, emphasis for quite some time, but more so over the last 4 years, has been in meeting the talent gap that we have in our state. And really, we're experiencing it nationwide, but we're competing now with other countries and other states on trying to attract that talent and grow that talent within our state. We're trying to incentivize the best students from all over the country to come to our universities, because we know that if you graduate from wherever you graduate from, you're more likely to find gainful employment within 100 miles of that campus. And so we want that talent in our state. We also have bills that create task forces that work with local workforce boards and local businesses to determine which credentials or which certifications or which majors are most needed by our industries to fill that talent gap, whether it be in manufacturing, in healthcare, which is where we have the biggest need in our state. That's where we have the biggest, the largest vacancies in any industry is in healthcare right now. Education. We're trying to address the shortages we have in talent, and that's where you're seeing the majority of our policy bills and the majority of how we're directing our dollars is all focused on growing the talent to meet the jobs that we have now and the jobs that are going to be that haven't yet been created but will be created in the next 5, 10, and 15 years.
Thank you. And Representative Aloupis, you want to add to that?
Well, yeah. So I think Rene's, Chair Plasencia is spot on. Obviously CTE, the workforce pipeline, has been a major focus of the House over the last few years, and I think a critical focus just because of, again, the skills gap that we're seeing with the number of job openings that we have and not having the talent to fill them. One of the things that I'm hearing a lot about as I've been traveling around, I was at FAMU this past week. I was at FIU the week before. I was meeting with Madeline Camarega, who's the new president of Miami-Dade College. And I'm a graduate of the University of Miami. I think there's a serious conversation about the value proposition of higher ed and what does it mean? What are you actually buying as a student? And I think it's probably going to impact the private universities more. I think because there's a huge issue now with so many students coming out of higher ed with just almost insurmountable debt. And it's so debilitating in that it's going to prevent individuals from going into the professions that they want. So what I'm starting to see, and these are conversations that I'm sure are happening across the state college system, is really looking at innovation and trying to focus on things like dual enrollment, which I know NBC is doing, and really building out pathways for as many professions as possible, but most specifically the professions that are most in need of talent. So again, that's really been our focus over the 3 years that I've been in the legislature. But I do think I've been very encouraged to hear the conversations that are not only happening at the university level, but at the state college level as well, in terms of their partnership with the K-12 system. Because again, I think, like Rene said, and Andrew, I'm going to jump up on my soapbox. Like the whole system is connected, and if we continue to look at it in silos, then heaven help us. Because if you don't think that investing in that child when he or she is 3 or 4 years old isn't impacting your classroom, you're wrong. If you don't think investing in the K-12 system isn't impacting the state college and the university system, you're wrong. And there's a reason why, the last time we did the kindergarten readiness screener, you had 43% of students who weren't ready for kindergarten. You go to third grade reading proficiency, you have 44% of children who can't read at proficiency at third grade. And then you go to 10th grade and you have 45% of 10th graders who can't read at proficiency. It's because there's a direct line through the entire system. And that's been my push, both in the legislature and outside of it, is to really make sure that as education advocates, whether you're a fifth grade teacher, you're an early childhood teacher, you're a college professor, that you're looking at the entire continuum and it's understanding that each of us are relying upon the other. And I think sometimes we lose that because we're fighting so hard for our own interests. But at the end of the day, the only interest we should have is the child. That's the only thing that matters. We're all in this because we believe in this idea that every child should be able to achieve whatever it is they want to achieve. And that can only be accomplished if you look at the entire system.
Yeah, and so Representative Aloupis, I would agree with you 100% because in our room right here, like I said, we have pre-K and we go all the way up to our colleges and universities. And so I want to just put out that we are a resource, and I know we work with both of you really well, but our members are a resource. And when we're having conversations about how to connect from pre-K into our elementary schools and through the K-12 continuum into our colleges and universities, we've got those folks ready and willing to sit down and have really good, strong policy conversations on that. Representative,
Andrew,
yeah, go ahead, Representative Plasencia.
Thank you. And so I just want to touch on a couple of points that Chair Aloupis made and just kind of share with you some of the things that are happening statewide. So one of the things that we initiated last year in proviso language was electronic resources. So it's our electronic library that we've had in the state of Florida for some years. We shifted it over to FSU. There was a little controversy. The governor inadvertently vetoed it 2 years ago. He paid for it in the back of the bill. So although it was vetoed, the funding, he found money to keep it going for that year. And then last year we funded it, and now it's over at Florida State University. But one of the things that we added to it is low-cost, no-cost textbooks. And what we have now are electronic textbooks, or I'll give you an example. And I'll give you an example of how inexpensive it is. And this is the direction we want our state to go. And we're trying to figure out how to do that right now. And we're actually going to have a workshop on it in a couple of weeks in my committee. Florida A&M University has partnered with a company called Cengage. Cengage has 22,000 publications. Those 22,000 publications have any and all textbooks that any student at Florida A&M University would need at any of their classes. And the cost per student is $126 for the entire year. So to purchase your books at Florida A&M University for the entire year, all you need is $126. But Florida A&M University took it one step forward, and they paid for it for all of their students. So their students right now in this program aren't having to pay for their books at all. So when you talk about cost savings, in the state of Florida, we haven't increased tuition in over 10 years. But the cost of education, of higher education, has gone up because the cost of books have gone up, the cost of fees have gone up, the cost of housing. The cost of living has gone up. The cost of tuition hasn't, but it's still the cost for a family has. So we're looking at ways that reducing that cost, and textbooks is one of them. We believe that students in our state and all over the country can get access to all of their textbooks for less than $100 a year, and we want to make sure that we go in that direction. We also want to use that for dual enrollment. So right now we appropriate in the K-12 budget, I want to say somewhere around $3 to $4 million so that the school districts can purchase textbooks for their students that are dual enrolled. we want to make sure that we can save those dollars by using this program and by offering a more robust online dual enrollment program, as opposed to having to be in person, travel to a school, or have a professor travel to your school, or having one of your teachers do it there. And then I did want to talk about two other things. The state of Florida last year, 2 years ago, we reinvested in it last year, invested $10 million in a grant program for our state colleges and our tech centers to apply for apprenticeship programs. And then I wanted to mention a program at Broward State College called Broward Up, which should serve as a model for all our state colleges, where they're taking their courses into underserved communities, whether it's at a Boys and Girls Club, at a community center. Now they're even using buses, where they'll have a mobile classroom. If you want to get a certification, if you want to get a credential, if you want to take courses towards an AA or a four-year degree that they offer at Broward College, then you can do that without having to leave your community. And I think that's innovative, and that's a game changer for our most underserved communities.
Thanks. So I want to try to, we're running out of time, and I want to try to get through a few more questions if we can. And so one of them is about the ending of FSA. We supported the announcement that the governor made recently to end FSA testing next school year. And we support this move because we see it as an opportunity for us to really focus on the teaching and the learning and the planning aspect of our jobs. And so, rather than this one high stakes test. And so do you have any thoughts on what might be coming here? We obviously really want to be part of it. We've had a lot of conversations with the Department of Education and the commissioner, but obviously this is going to come through the legislature at some point. So any thoughts on what you're hearing or any advice to us as we try to really make sure that we see this as an opportunity to really focus on student learning and what we have to do to be prepared for that? So I'll start with you, Chair Aloupis, I should say.
Yeah, so unless Rene's hiding something, I have not seen the bill yet, so I'm not sure what is being proposed. I've obviously heard the comments from the governor's office. I think one of the things that that has driven Florida's public education reform over the last 20 years has really been the focus on accountability, and clearly there's the federal requirement of summative assessment data. But I certainly understand, because I have children in school, and my wife, as I said, was in the public school system, the impact of that one test at the end of the year and what that dynamic looks like for the classroom. So, my hope, and I know under your leadership, Andrew, that this will be a very thoughtful conversation, is really looking at the circumstances surrounding the assessment, understanding that there has to be accountability. That's something that, our legislative body believes in. But making sure that, seeing if there are opportunities for us as a state to make sure that it's not just that one test that, everybody's waiting for at the end of the year and totally changes the dynamic of the classroom.
Thank you. Representative or Chair Plasencia.
So I agree with everything Chair Aloupis said. I haven't seen anything. I've heard very little. Obviously, I've inquired, I've had conversations, and I know quite a bit about the assessments, much like Chair Aloupis does. And I'm curious to see exactly what happens. We have to take a look at the federal guidelines and what the mandates are from the federal government on what's required by each state, including the state of Florida. We need to be thoughtful. We need to be innovative. I wholeheartedly believe that everyone has heard the concerns from teachers, from parents, from administrators, and there is a concerted effort to get this right. I'm optimistic and I'm hopeful that what does come out will have input from educators and from administrators and from parents, and that it will be the best policy that is allowed to be passed under federal guidelines.
Thank you both for that. And I just want to say on that topic, just as we have an opportunity with you guys, we're not saying end accountability, clearly. We know that's not what we're talking about. But the opportunity that I think exists is one in which we can address some aspects of this teacher shortage, which is the stress that so many of our teachers across the state are under in terms of how we approach this. And you both just said that too. You know, the how is what is important here. And so that's why we've been having conversations with DOE. And as you guys see this move through the process, you know, what we would ask is make sure you're asking your colleagues as well, hey, have you talked to FEA about this? Because we really think there's an opportunity here for a joint partnership and really in a nonpartisan way to do what is best for kids, focusing on their learning and really taking this opportunity to also help empower and lift up the voice of teachers who are trained to do this work every day. So let me ask real quick 2 more questions. One formal question, then one kind of open-ended question. But this next question, you guys know last year we saw some legislation, it's come up a few times, that kind of comes after an attempt to take away the freedom of our members to come together to advocate in their union. And there's also been some legislation that would weaken the retirement system for our educators and others. So do you think, we kind of expect these bills may be back, but what are you hearing and what do you think, and what advice, again, do you have us as we oppose these kinds of legislation to really be effective in this work? And so I'll start with you, Representative Plasencia.
Yeah, so I think the most important thing is something I touched on before, is how you advocate, especially when election time comes around. It's okay to as a body, decide who you want to endorse, whether they're Republican or Democrat. You definitely want to endorse and support candidates that support you and support your union and the job that teachers do and all school employees do. But at the same time, you can do that in a respectful way. And I say that as someone who, when I first ran for office, I was opposed vehemently by my union that I was a member of for 15 years. And in full transparency here, the union president at the CTA is not the same one that was there when I first started. So I'm not talking negatively about anybody that's currently in your audience, because I would never do that. But oftentimes we get too caught up in partisanship, and education should not be a partisan issue. And civility should not be lost in any level of politics or government. And you can oppose someone and do it in a respectful way, because at the end of the day, that person you oppose may be the person that you're coming to ask for help once the election is over. And it's really difficult to go to someone that, they, in their mailbox or their parents' mailbox or their neighbor's mailbox, they see things that tend to be either lies or exaggerations or just something that, just shouldn't be put on a mailer and sent around to someone's community. And so I say that because it happens, and it happens too often. And so I think if as a group, all of our local unions conduct themselves in a respectful and a civil way and in an engaging way, you would see these types of bills get less further down than they already do. Someone's going to file the bill no matter what happens, but the bill doesn't have to get heard. And some of these bills have actually gotten to either the House floor or the Senate floor. They died somewhere in committee or in the process, but they never even need to get that far. And I think it comes down to how we as individuals and as local unions conduct ourselves.
Thank you. And Chair Aloupis.
Well said, Chair. Andrew, I don't know what the next question is, but I do want to celebrate Kathy Boehm, who's one of your absolute incredible champions before we finish today. I think what, and everyone should be clapping for her if she's there. I think what Rene said is so spot on. And, for me on that issue, it's my position is driven by the relationships that I have, right? And I think a lot of times we've lost, it's not even just the civility, it's the humanity in politics, right? Understanding that the ability to sit across the table from somebody where you may have differing opinions, but trying to find that common ground. My wife certainly doesn't agree with me on everything. But we still love each other, and we have an incredible family. And if she lets me, I'll be married to her for the rest of my life. But in all seriousness, I just think in my own time in the House, in the 3 years that I've been there, what I've been able to accomplish with the help of organizations like FEA. I think it allows me to come home every week after being away from my 3 little girls, who are 10, 8, and 3. These are nights of reading, dinners with my family that I will not get back. But the relationship that I have with so many of your members, including the folks from the 305, I know Carla Hernandez Matz is there. These are relationships that I have. So when they come to me and they express their concerns, I listen. And it's amazing how far you can get if you have those kinds of relationships. And unfortunately, because of where we are in our political discourse right now, a lot of times the doors are never even opened. So that's my recommendation is for those the members that you have in your delegation or in your district, begin to build those relationships and build those relationships out of an open heart, an open mind, and trying to understand and identify the commonalities. Because I promise you, if you could come and sit in our member dining room and just see how we as a body work together, it would give you hope for the future of America. Because you have people across the political spectrum who are sitting and breaking bread and talking as individuals, as human beings, as mothers, as fathers, and they're not looking at each other because of a letter behind their name. And unfortunately, sometimes when we leave those rooms, the dynamics change. But there's a collegiality in our body that I think if we could replicate in society, we would be a lot better off.
Well, listen, I want to give you guys a minute to close. Yes, and before I do that, I do want to thank you for taking time out of a Friday evening away from your families to spend a little bit of time with our 600 delegates here. And you're absolutely right. I mean, what our body talked about today, as a matter of fact, was that public education is and must remain a nonpartisan issue. And we're obviously changing how we approach the work we do. So for you guys to kind of close, is there anything else as we kind of go down this path, that any other advice that you have or any closing comments you want to make for a minute or two to the 600 delegates here from all over the state? And I will start with you, Representative or Chair Aloupis.
So, Andrew, I'm not trying to get you a raise or anything, and I'm a huge Fed Ingram fan, but you and I have known each other for a long time, and I would just say that to the folks listening in the room, you've got great leadership, very pragmatic leadership, practical leadership, and inspired leadership. I will echo my comments to the previous question, but I'll give you an example of why I think these relationships matter and why it's important, especially on issues of education, which I think is the most crucial thing we talk about in the legislative body. Pragmatism over politics. And I'll give you an example. I carried 2 years ago, I believe it was HB 7069, which was the turnaround school bill. And it was a bill that dealt with schools that were persistently low performing. And I can remember Kathy Boehm coming to me and expressing serious concerns and saying, have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? And I'll tell you right now, she spent more time in my office than I think probably any stakeholder. And now I think it's important to realize that my door was always open to her. And I always wanted to hear what she had to say, because she had spent so much time in the classroom. She knew what she was talking about. And we may not have agreed on everything, but I respected her as an individual. I respected her background, and I wanted to hear what she thought. And she'll tell you if you ask her, I amended the bill, I think 7 or 8 times, addressing issues that were raised that were not addressed in the original version of the PCB. And ultimately, we got it to the House floor, and a bill that could have very easily been a party line vote ended up passing with more than 100 votes, I believe, across the chamber. And I actually had an update the other day in terms of the impact of that bill, and the number of schools that we have now in turnaround have dropped precipitously. But that bill would not have gotten to where it was without my having that relationship with Kathy and being able to trust her and know that she was giving me good information and that she was coming from a place of just wanting to do the best for the students. And I think sometimes in education policy, and I see it in all silos, is we take our eye off the student, and the student is the only thing that matters. Every one of you in that room went into education not because you wanted to get rich, but because you wanted to create the next generation. You wanted to help the next generation. And the beauty of your profession, and I tell my wife this all the time, When Rene and I die, very few people are going to remember us, right? I'm sorry, Rene, it's just the reality. Your wife will hopefully, hopefully our wives remember us. But the reality is this, in Rene's capacity as a teacher, long after he's gone, he's going to have students walking around this planet who are going to talk about Coach P. My wife, when she's no longer on this earth, there's still going to be students walking around talking about Mrs. Aloupis. This is a profession about legacy, and I don't think there's anything more important. So, those are my final comments. And just building those meaningful relationships, I hope you can at least see you can create such incredible opportunities for children just by having those conversations.
Thank you. Chair Plasencia.
Yeah, so before I go, I do want to mention Anthony Colucci. I was a teacher, thought I'd retire as a teacher, never thought I would do anything else, never wanted to do anything else. And it was only because another teacher encouraged me to run for office and kind of guided me in that process, because I was, kind of a political novice, didn't really know what I was doing. And to a certain extent, apolitical, and I still am to a certain extent. I would still be teaching right now. And so I see my purpose for having gotten elected and serving for what will be 8 years, to do everything I can to be an advocate for our K-12 system and teachers. And working with Anthony Colucci, if you're having thoughts about, or second thoughts about what your union does and how you should conduct yourself and who you should talk to and how to strategize, talk to Anthony. He's done an incredible job in Brevard County. I couldn't have imagined a better person to work with and a better friend to have than Anthony in this process, and someone I can talk to. So just somebody that I encourage everyone to reach out and just say, hey, Anthony, what do you guys do in Brevard County that's working? Because it's working. And the last thing I want to leave you with is just talking about Vance Aloupis. I got to know Vance before he even ran for office. I met him through a mutual friend. I thought he was a phenomenal person then. And as you can tell, extremely intelligent and thoughtful. Not all elected officials are equal. Some are more intelligent, some are more passionate, some have a greater skill set. I guarantee you none will have a greater impact on education than Vance Aloupis. And I know that for a fact. By the time Vance is done, whether it's 8 years or if he decides to go longer, 12 or 16 years, no one will have a better impact during this time period or a greater impact on education and K-12 education than Vance Aloupis. I encourage everyone to get to know him. I encourage everyone to follow what he does and to listen to him, because he really is a thought leader and he really is a leader that is very much respected by all of us in the legislature, Republican and Democrat, both sides, House, Senate, and the governor's office. And God willing, if he's there for 8 years, you will see the most profound movement in the positive direction for public education in our state.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you. And so on behalf of all our delegates in the room, I want to thank both of you, Chair Aloupis, Chair Plasencia, again, for taking time out of Friday, taking time away from your families and joining us here. We really appreciate it, and we look forward to working with you some more during this legislative session. Thank you all.